witchcraft. Paul said, who hath bewitched you? Witchcraft says if you say the right words and say these names and all this stuff, then what you do is that you invoke what's called the elemental powers of the force. All right? You invoke the force and the elemental powers of the force. If you go to a search engine on the internet and type in elemental magic, you'll see that what I'm telling you is true. That's what elemental magic is, elemental witchcraft. They worship the four elements. Here they are: earth, fire, water, and air, or earth, wind, fire, and water, or whatever, however way that you want to do that. Okay? They say that when these elements are invoked by the sacred words or the sacred names, then the God force is released. Okay? In other words, I'll put it in the sacred name idea. Sacred name says that God is up in heaven. He's all powerful. He can do everything in the world. But if you say His name wrong, He can't touch you. He won't. I'm not. This is their version of God. I'm not listening to you until you say my name right. That's their version of God. That's not this God. The God of this Bible doesn't act that way. These guys say that that's how He acts. And so it's all about elemental magic. You must say the tetragrammaton, the four letters, in order to invoke the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. Which, you know what earth, wind, fire, and the water are in the Bible? You know what those four are? Principalities, powers, rulers of darkness of this world, and spiritual wickedness in high places. Those are the very things that God gave us this book to defend against. These people not only don't want you to defend against them, they want you to invoke them by saying the sacred name. This is one of their websites. The divine name from the Old Testament is the fourfold name known as the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He-Vah-He. This is divine power expressed through the elements of fire, water, air, and earth that create the fabrics of time, space, and matter. The fivefold name, Yod-He-Shin-Vah-He, utilizes the addition of pure spirit into the elements, giving life. Yod-He-Shin-Vah-He is seen as the God-man, or the divine life in matter. That's witchcraft, is what it is. Here is the idea from servantsoflight.org. Listen to what they say. In Kabbalistic philosophy, there are four worlds which constitute the universe. After a certain manner, they correspond with the four magical elements. The four elements of fire, water, air, and earth are reflections of the four worlds of the Kabbalah. Thus is fulfilled the divine saying, as above, so below. Stop right here. If you study and know anything about witchcraft, you know that one of their invocations is, as above, so below. Elemental magic. Let me continue on. The four worlds and the four elements correspond with the four letters of the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He-Vah-He, which is the so-called incommunicable name of God, which in occult science represents a magical formula of supreme universal importance. So, I want you to hear me out on this. This book never said anything about you must invoke the sacred name of God in order to get Him to work. The sacred name movement says you must invoke and say the Tetragrammaton in the exact right way in order to get God to work. The occultists and the Illuminatists and the witches and the people in the Kabbalah. Let me explain. You know what Kabbalah is? Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. Kabbalah is everything that God told the Jews not to learn. God told them not to learn from the Egyptians, told them not to learn from the Babylonians, told them not to learn from the Sumerians, told them not to learn from the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Amorites. He told them not to learn from the Moabites. He told them not to learn their religion. He begged them, please don't learn their religion. So what did the Israelites do? They went into Canaan land and they learned the religion of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Amorites, the Moabites, the Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. In fact, a major portion of current Jewish teaching comes from the Babylonian Talmud. It's basically their ideas and principles that they learned while they were in, guess where? Babylon. Think about it. Okay? It is Babylonian witchcraft magic that is being practiced here by the invocation of the sacred name. Here is a website. Notice the letters here. And I want you to look at this. You have 4 Hebrew letters. Yod, He, Vav, He. Okay? Now, I just happen to know that that's what they are. The problem is, I don't read Hebrew. If you put some other letters up here, I would go, I don't know what that is. There's no Hebrew letters in my Bible that I read every day. There's none of that there. So I want you to look at this, and here's what this website says. The reason the pronunciation is the best guess is because Jews never pronounced the 4-letter name of God. Since nobody was ever trying to pronounce it, and because so much of language is based on doing the same thing other people do, and to make matters more complicated, Hebrew has no vowels, so it's all the more important to learn how other people pronounce words. Today, nobody really knows how this word was supposed to be pronounced. By the time the Christians showed up 2,000 years ago, they chose some pronunciations, Jehovah being the most popular. Kabbalists often tell us that the 4-letter name for God isn't actually a name at all. Now, I want you to stop right here. I want you to listen to me. Hear me out as I read this. The Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, which is what I'm going to show you, this is based on. The Kabbalah says that this Yod, He, Vav, He isn't really a name for God. If it's not a name for God, according to them, what is it? It's a formula for creation. It describes the process by which God created the universe. First, there was energy, rather formless and without direction, and that energy was received and worked out before moving forward and finally being made material. The 4 elements, fire, water, air, and earth, are often used to represent these 4 stages of creation. You know what they're telling you? That the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton in magic represent the powerful magical forces of earth, air, fire, and water, which this Bible says are principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness, and spiritual wickedness in high places. They're devils. That's what they are. That's what witchcraft is based on. Witchcraft, the power of witchcraft, is based upon what devils can do. And so here, according to the Kabbalah, which is what this is based on, the Kabbalah says that if you can figure out how to pronounce the sacred name, then you will have magic powers of creation. You can create wealth, you can create this, you can say that. You can have your prayers answered if you say the sacred name of God in the right way. So take a look again at this graphic here with the Yod, He, Vav, He on it. That's the Kabbalah magic witchcraft. Now look at this divine name, King James Bible. There's something about this that's not right. It's based upon, it's teaching you that if you say and invoke the proper name of God, that He'll go to work for you. It's witchcraft. Here's what Albert Mackey said in his Lexicon of Freemasonry about the Tetragrammaton. The Tetragrammaton might only be uttered once a year on the Day of Atonement by the high priest in the Holy of Holies amid the sound of trumpets and cymbals, which prevented the people from hearing it. It is said that in consequence of the people thus refraining from its utterance, the true pronunciation of the name was at last lost. The Jews further believed that the Tetragrammaton was possessed by unbounded powers. He who pronounces it shakes heaven and earth and inspires the very angels with astonishment and terror. The ineffable name thus conferred miraculous gifts. It was engraved on the rod of Moses and enabled him to perform wonders, just as according to the Toledat Yeshu, it conferred the same powers on Christ. Now, Albert Mackey is wacky Mackey, okay? Albert Mackey, Alfred Mackey and Pike and all these guys, they were whacked out in their head. Pike talks about the Tetragrammaton too, and the magical powers that it has. Mackey is trying to tell you that on the rod of Moses was engraved the magic letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, and that's how he had the power to do all that stuff. Listen, I know the Bible doesn't say that, But that's the principle behind it. That's the magic behind it. And then they say that Christ had that same power on him by the sacred name Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. Are you listening to me? Because I'm going to show you what some of the sacred namers admit in their doctrine of the sacred name. It matches this perfectly. Here's what Helena Blavatsky said. You remember her, don't you? This evil witch of the 1800s. Here's what she said about the Tetragrammaton. But the rabbins or the rabbis do not care to remember the Zoharic admission that Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh means not as I am written am I read, which is from the Zohar. One has to know how to divide the Tetragrammaton ad infinitum before one arrives at the sound of the truly unpronounceable name of the Jewish mystery God. You know what she's saying? She's saying, number one, the Jews should read their own Zohar. You know what the Zohar is? The Zohar is, well, it's kind of like this, okay? The Zohar is it's Jewish mysticism. It's the guidebook for Jews on how they worship and relate to the God of the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. It's the magic and the witchcraft that they learned from the Babylonians and the Canaanites that God told them not to learn. And they compiled it down into a book called the Zohar. The Zohar basically is a guidebook of witchcraft among Jews. And I want you to remember that. Very important that you remember that. The Zohar deals with what's called the Kabbalah tree of life. Now I want you to remember, according to Mackey here is his Lexicon of Freemasonry, the belief was that Moses had on his rod the ineffable name of God, or the Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, the magical name of God. It's got all the power in it, and he had that inscribed on his rod. All right? Now, the Zohar, the Kabbalah deals with what's called the tree of life. You see a representation of it here. The tree of life basically is, according to the Kabbalah, it's the key of how a mortal can turn into a god. It's the key. Now, I'm not going to do an in-depth, intensive teaching on the Kabbalah tree of life. I've taught about this in other areas before. It's to be avoided. It is witchcraft. It is as pagan as the day is long, and God said stay away from it. And let me tell you something. Most Jews right now that you think are just, they're following the Old Testament, they're not. They're following the Kabbalah. And I'm going to prove that to you here in a little bit. According to the Zohar, the Kabbalah teaches about what's called the tree of life. Now, let's go back to the Old Testament. Let's go to the book of Genesis. We know in the Garden of Eden there were two trees. There was a tree of life. There was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God gave mankind a choice. Which one are you going to choose? This is the tree of life. The words of God are a tree of life. So anything outside of this book is not the tree of life. What does that make it? Tree of knowledge of good and evil. But notice they've replaced the name of it. They don't want you to believe that you're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil because God said don't do that. They want you to think that you're taking and partaking of the tree of life. And the tree of life in their idea is based upon witchcraft. It is not God's tree of life. Now, here's the reason why I bring all this up in its association with the sacred name movement. I mentioned Jim Staley a while ago. There's another guy by the name of Peter Michas. I used to have this book. I think